Well, are we carrying that energy into like the Winchesters finale though, or are we shaving some of that energy off?
I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. Um, I liked it as an episode. I will lead with that. I think our expectations were maybe high after last week's awesome penultimate episode, but I think this we'll get into how it kind of served as a series finale shortly. But the start of it was a little bit slow moving, which is kind of what the Winchesters has been doing. But I think around the halfway mark, it kind of clicked into gear. It was more of a supernatural episode than a Winchesters episode.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's when it really found its footing. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I would like the Winchesters to have its own footing removed from Supernatural. But yeah, I'll leave that thought with you and see what you make of it.
That's a great point because while it worked for me, even as someone who didn't watch the entirety of Supernatural, like it worked, but it did. I can see how it could be maybe a little bit jarring because it was like a lot of Supernatural all at once, whereas like in the pilot we get a little bit of the seeds of Supernatural, and then throughout the season we've had like the Dean pictures, and it's very much in the world of Supernatural, but suddenly we were like heavily steeped in the mythology of Supernatural.
Mhm.
And not that it came out of nowhere, but it was just like a lot, which I'm sure for Supernatural super fans, they were like living, thriving, screaming, crying. I've seen the videos on Twitter. But like it was kind of a lot. And I didn't know if it was, I feel like it was all leading to this, but I was like, I don't know. I think that was my overall feeling, was just like, huh, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like it opened strong. Like I like the flashback to
Mm,
when John received the letter and he received it from Dean, and then Dean just disappeared on him. Especially because we get that moment where John feels like after he buried his friend, he doesn't know where he belongs anymore,
Yeah.
and so receiving that letter from his father just really pushed him to go back home. And I like that that was the catalyst. We already knew that, but to see it happen, I really enjoyed. And then we got into, I feel like I struggled with the middle of the episode, more so because the stakes weren't there. Like, once again, like, I know the Akridas are taking over the world, and I get about their queen, which there was a plot twist there, which was interesting. And I feel like I felt for Lata. I wish I had felt more for Ada. I feel like that was resolved a little faster than I would have preferred.
mhm,
But after all that, it wasn't until we get towards the big battle at the end that I felt like we were really,
mhm.
truly leaning into the weight of what was going to be happening if they couldn't defeat the Akrida. But I think it's also because this was largely contained between this group and no one else in the world knows this is happening. And I mean, that's the point, right? Like the hunters do what they do, and the rest of humanity gets to go on unawares that people are sacrificing their lives in this manner, and they're allowed to live without seeing the veil, and that's
Mm-hmm.
fine. But I just felt like I wanted to be in fear more, and I just felt like there wasn't a lot of fear or anything thrilling enough to make me question whether someone was going to survive, even if I know they're a main character and of course they're going to survive.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because I feel like this is the same issue we're going to have with the Flash later on. Is that it very much felt like, oh, the world is ending, so let's just stand around and talk about it. It kind of felt like they could have been doing more in the moment, and I think we've mentioned that with the Winchesters before, and they kind of got over that. But then I like that's the second quarter of the episode. There was an awful lot of conversation and not an awful lot of doing, and it was only when they figured out that wait, Lata's in the clubhouse. Wait, we need to get in there. That's when things started picking up the pace a little bit. And then we went right into the final battle. I don't think it was until like that moment between John and Mary where they had that kind of like emotional goodbye that you really felt the stakes starting to set in. And that could have been the performances, because I was like, oh, this really feels like the end now. And it didn't feel like that beforehand. So yeah, I feel like there was a lot of good in there, but I just needed to press the fast forward button a little bit more just to get to the point a little bit quicker.
Am I wrong in thinking, or maybe I'm misremembering, that the Akrita were like mostly unseen throughout the season? Is
Yeah.
that
Mm-hmm.
why the stakes felt low? Because I feel like I kept hearing Akrita, and I'm like, was it the spiders? Is it the queen? Like, I there was a disconnect for me personally, and that could just be a me problem. right? Like I've said from the beginning of the show, so don't come for me. I was like, I'm never going to understand the mythology of the show. And that's true. 13 odd weeks later, I don't really understand the mythology, and that's fine. I don't need to. But maybe that's part of the layer of why the villain arc of the season didn't completely work for me, because I'm like, I haven't seen them in weeks. I don't know what am I in fear of, like Sabrina said.
Yeah. And I feel like we've used this example of Stranger Things before, of how like 4 seasons into that, you have the threat of the upside down and everything. And then you look back and look how that show made a single Demogorgon in its first season such a threat. Whereas the Winchesters is working with an army of spider creatures here that maybe pop up once every 6 episodes. And we should have, if they were opting for the unseen approach, we should have felt the terror of it being unseen. But we didn't kind of, it was just like, right, now we've made the finale, now we finally have to deal with this. Oh, it's dealt with, and that's that done. I just kind of would have wanted a little bit more terror, a little bit more stakes, and a little bit more like, hold on a minute, the world is actually ending. And I don't really feel like we got that until the very last moment.
Well, they just kept telling us about that.
They did, and the Akrida did take people of influence in the town, but it never felt like, even then, the stakes there just didn't really feel like they should be that worried or concerned. Like, yeah, you took a detective. What if you took the entire department? Like, and then with the police department were harassing some of the hunters. Like, what if we like she didn't end up being the Akrida queen, but Bridget Regan's character, where what did it matter that she was a DJ? I thought that her talking on the airwaves was going to influence people with the sound of her voice, that they were going to fall under the Akrida spell, and that's not what happened. Her being a DJ didn't really matter. She could have like been an accountant, and the same thing still would have went the same way. She just ended up being like super cool, right? So I just feel like I wanted more plot over aesthetic, and I feel like we were getting a lot of aesthetic and dressing of villainy, but not enough strong villainy, which is disappointing, because we started really strong with the villains. I mean, I'll never forget that creepy scene of her in the hood and then the bugs following after her in the woods. Like, that's terrifying. I don't want to see them in daylight or in the dark. Like, it's just,
I remember how excited we were about that.
Yeah. Her and her like nimble little fingers. I was like,
yeah, and then to bring in, then we did meet who we think is the queen, this hunter, Joan Hopkins, who was a human who was transported to their world, and then they needed a leader, and she led them back. And I will say that's a really interesting story, but the fact that it only came up in the finale very much reeked off, wait a minute, who are you and why are you here? It just, I feel like that could have carried the stakes if she turned into the big bad, but just calling her the queen for centuries, then looking at what looked like a spider creature, but we didn't actually say it, and then just to find out that it was a scorned hunter leading these supernatural demons. The story is there. I just feel it didn't particularly write itself in the finale, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and she invited Mary to join her, and I felt like that was going to be a bigger thing. Did I miss something? It didn't end up being a thing. Like, she didn't even consider it, did she? I was like, oh, here we go, and I was like, oh no, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, no, it did. I feel like this. So, like, on paper, the twist about the queen is really exciting. Like, you have a human who's decided, because of her own grief and trauma, that humanity shouldn't even just be wiped out on her Earth. It should be wiped out across every Earth. Like, and that is
the multiverse thing. You guys know I was like fighting for my life trying to understand it.
To your point on that, I was also trying to understand how Dean was able to travel the multiverse via car. That, like, you mentioned that, and I was like, wait. This
baby is so powerful. She can drive through space and time. I have no idea. That whole scene, I was like the meme with the math equations around my head. I was like, I'm listening, Jensen. help me thread the needle.
Yeah, the lore there is a little confusing. So does that mean that literally anybody, like Dean, John, Mary, grandparents, whatever, the most harmless of entity from another Earth could destroy the Akrida just because it's from another Earth? Is that what we're going here? Because the Akrida can only be destroyed by something not off
I'm
this
not
Earth.
even going to pretend to understand what you just asked me.
I don't know. I know the woman who was Queen Joan, she could be like killed with silver, but I didn't necessarily know if that meant the Akrida could too. I feel like I lost the thread as we went, as they told us more and more about the Akrida. I felt like I was losing information that they had told us about them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that was the case. Like, could you kill her with an antique butter knife or something? Is that what you're trying to
Yeah.
tell me? Just a nice
I
little stab, like.
Yeah. And
yeah,
and
that was
I
all confusing. But you guys know me. Like, I was so ready in Nancy to assume that the kiss between Bess and Odette was gonna like make Odette flutter out into the air and we'd be done with her. So when Mary rammed Joan into the wormhole, I was like, sweet, perfect, I'll take it. I don't know. I didn't ask questions.
And yeah, it worked. It did exactly what it said on the tin, and it was like hilarious. We knew it was coming. Like they had that like Mary driving for a good 5 minutes there. They really built up to it, and it played out exactly as we thought. Like I really couldn't have asked for anything more than that. I'm just a little confused on the lore. Like, does that mean like a helpless, nice old lady from another Earth could kill the Akrida just because she's from another Earth? That seems to be what they were going for there. That anything not of this Earth can kill the Akrida, and you're like, but the Akrida aren't from this Earth either. Very confusing. But I mean, she got rammed by a car. She went into a wormhole. She never came back out of the wormhole. Rest in peace. Let's move on. The job was done.
Did you guys hear that Meg got her driver's license just for this episode?
No, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, and she was like so nervous to drive with her other cast members in the car, and she like, but she said she had fun. It was cute.
She's like, I'm doing it. This is the scene we've been waiting for. It shall be me in the car, not this stunt double.
Yeah, it was so cute. I read a Q&A with her and she was like, we were going like 40 miles per hour. And I was like, oh, it's not that fast. But I can see like when you're like just learning how to drive, that is like terrifying.
And she really went for it in the scene.
Yeah,
she killed it. She was
It was
amazing.
great. I still, to go back to things that we just didn't understand. So she pops in to the wormhole and then her and Dean pop out. And it's like, well, where were you? Because that just makes me feel like we just landed on a piece of rock in the wormhole and he was just waiting for the car to come back. And he just got in it and put her in it too, and we just popped back out. I was like, this doesn't make sense. Neither does, I guess, the Akrida were made by God as a failsafe.
Yeah.
He said that like in a throwaway sentence, and I was like, go back. What do you mean?
My supernatural knowledge woke up in that moment when Dean said Chuck. I was like, I know who Chuck is. And then they were like, Chuck's God. And I was like, okay, now I get it. And so I remember that was a storyline in Supernatural that like God like abandoned the earth 5 seasons in or something like that. I really do need to brush up. But I mean, that's
funny to think about. Like he was like, peace, I'm out.
But it linked back nicely. That was a memory I would probably have never thought about again ever in my life, and then unlocked it. So I was like, yes, I can see the thread here. There were some lovely supernatural Easter eggs in it. Another one was when Bobby showed up in the first scene beside Dean when they were watching John. That got me a little in the heart because I really enjoyed Bobby's character on Supernatural, and him and Dean had a lovely bond. So that was nice. Didn't understand who the other man was. I know the actor, but that meant nothing to me. But yeah, I will say as a Supernatural fan, I really appreciated the Bobby reference. Obviously, seeing Dean again was wonderful. Seeing Baby again was wonderful. Some of the plot was like, you do, yeah. But generally, I really, just as a Supernatural fan, enjoyed what this kind of did as a, dare I say, a series finale to the Supernatural universe. And dare I say, some Supernatural fans might prefer it as a series finale than the actual Supernatural series finale.
Well, look, the way they wrapped it up, it seemed like they did some remaneuvering. That's not even a word, but like it seemed like because Mary was like, oh, I'm leaving, and then like 4 seconds later she was like, JK, I want you to come with me. That kind of felt like they moved things around, because I could have seen like if this had been one, a longer season, and two, they could trust that they were going to come back for season 2, Mary probably could have just left, and that could have been like a cliffhanger. Now, I'm not saying that was the plan. That's just my fan brain seeing the mechanics of a script and, you know, watching too much TV, where I could kind of see like, oh, maybe they kind of like move things around. But as it stood, it felt like a successful limited series. And I don't want that to be like, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in like they did what they came to do, and they could come back for more, or we could have this standalone piece of a prequel, and it works. So I think it was they successful in that they did what they set out to do.
I think so too. The way that it does wrap, it does feel like, and that doesn't necessarily mean that this is the case, but it does feel like they were told, "Hey, look, things are happening at the CW. If you want to make sure that your season wraps like a series, do that, and then like you can just unravel if you get a season 2." Because it does seem strange. Like you said, she was like, "JK, I'm coming back," and then she goes, "Then we can explore during the day, and you can hunt at night." I was like, he's going to hunt by himself at night. I thought we already said that was a bad idea, but let's get in the car and drive away. And that they're using Dean's journal, and there's a lot of emotional weight that they didn't understand from him. When it came to passing that knowledge on to his parents, and the hint, wink, wink, this is the universe where everything will work out, or at least he hopes so. So I feel like if this is the universe where Dean feels like his family has a chance, then if they ended it here, this works, because we literally drove off into the daylight. Like, it's bright, they're happy, we're playing music, and we're being cute together, and everybody is fine. Even Ada got her soul back. I didn't understand what Lotta put in. I mean, I guess that was her soul in the plant. Did not understand that, but I'm glad that she has the piece of her soul.
Yeah, it definitely feels like they tied every loose end up so that this could function as a finale needed by. But that little thread that John's carrying on hunting during the night is there should they need to go back to it if it does get picked up. Because you could literally like rehash the same start of the story for season 2, that Mary contacts Carlos and Nata because John's gone missing during one of his hunts on the night. Bang, there's your season 2 concept right there. But the thing is, it feels like a series finale in that you get a happy ending. And again, to go back to the supernatural end of it, I did appreciate that it feels like that we started the show just thinking it was any old prequel, and why did we need to know the story when we already technically know the story? And now we've ended it knowing that it's not a prequel, it's actually a parallel Earth, and the story is not set, it could play out differently. And now that we've learned that information, this does feel like Dean's final little thing to give, because if he had any unfinished business, because Dean always had issues with what happened to his family and his parents, and he loved them dearly and the life they had. Now he got the chance to maybe alter it slightly so that it's changed. And I feel like if you're ever going to get some kind of a happy ending and it is like interdimensional undead universe, that's it. And it really worked out nicely. So if that is the end of the supernatural story, I think it was actually quite genius. I know some of the day-to-day stuff in the Winchesters didn't exactly work out, but generally it's a really enjoyable addition to the supernatural universe that adds a neat little bow on the end of it, one that we didn't know it needed. So if this is the end, it was actually a pretty lovely end. And as a Supernatural fan, I really appreciated it. It was a nice little nod to the universe, to the fans, to the story, to the prequel, and to the future. And if that's the end of it, then that's the end of it. But the montage at the end with John and Mary writing off was lovely. It was a nice little tribute to like, we had this moment, we lived in this moment, and now we're moving into the future. And I hope that future involves more Winchesters. But if it doesn't, I'm glad these characters we love so much got happy endings.
It feels very solid. Very solid.